Imagine that you are holding a tiny clay ball in the palm of your hand. It has been sitting there for 5,500 years, completely sealed shut. When you hold it to your ear and gently shake it, you hear strange little sounds rattling inside. There are perhaps 5 or 6 tiny objects bouncing against the walls of the hardened clay. You cannot know what is inside unless you break it open. But a prehistoric person, living 5.5 millennia ago, sealed those objects inside for a very special reason. Before sealing the ball, they pressed each tiny object into the surface while the clay was still soft. They left behind a row of small indentations, tiny marks directly on the outside of the clay sphere. It was a perfect record-keeping system that allowed them to know what was inside without having to break it open. This object was not a religious work of art. It was not a spiritual artifact or an ancient poem. It was an accounting ledger. That tiny clay ball filled with rattling objects was one of the most important objects in human history, because those tiny marks on its surface were the direct ancestors of every word you are reading today. So how exactly did humans invent writing? The real answer is far less romantic or poetic than we might imagine. It did not begin with a poet reaching for greatness or a priest recording the words of the gods. It began with sheep, sacks of barley, and the biological limitations of the human brain. Let us begin with one remarkable number, because this number helps explain the entire birth of human civilization. In 1992, evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar at the University of Oxford published a groundbreaking study. He showed that the human brain has a cognitive limit on the number of stable social relationships it can maintain. That natural limit is around 150 people. Below 150, a human community could function almost entirely through memory alone. You knew who owed what to whom. You knew who could be trusted and who was always breaking promises. You remembered every face, every debt, and every minor grudge in the village. Social management was simply a matter of word of mouth. Accounting was the memory inside your own head. And for roughly 290,000 years of human existence, that natural system was more than enough for survival. Until one day, it wasn't anymore. Around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, a settlement called Uruk began to explode in size. It developed into something the human world had never seen before. By 3100 BC, Uruk covered more than 250 hectares and was home to between 40,000 and 80,000 people. Anthropologist Robert McCormick Adams surveyed the region and documented this enormous concentration of population in 1981. Uruk was the first true city to emerge on our planet, and a city of 80,000 people faced a survival problem that a village of 150 had never needed to consider. No one could remember everything anymore. You could no longer remember every farmer, every worker, every flock of sheep, or every jar of beer. You could not keep track of every ration of grain distributed to workers on enormous construction projects. The amount of information had now exceeded the storage capacity of any single human brain. Humanity was entering the greatest memory crisis in history. They were forced to find a way to move their memory outside the human skull. But writing did not suddenly appear the moment the city of Uruk became overwhelmed. It had been quietly accumulating and developing for the previous 5,000 years. The person who traced this hidden history was Professor Denise Schmant-Besserat of the University of Texas. She spent decades classifying tiny clay objects that archaeologists had previously dismissed and thrown away. They were tiny cones, spheres, discs, cylinders, and tetrahedrons made of clay. More than 8,000 of these objects have been discovered at more than 100 archaeological sites, stretching from Turkey to Pakistan. For a long time, no one understood what they had been used for, until Schmant-Besserat decoded their secret. They were counting tools, also known as commodity tokens. Each shape represented a specific type of goods in everyday life. A small cone represented a small quantity of grain. A sphere represented a larger quantity of grain. A cylinder represented a livestock animal. 2 jars of oil corresponded to 2 egg-shaped tokens, while 3 sheep corresponded to 3 cylindrical tokens. It was an extremely simple and effective three-dimensional counting system. Humans continuously used this system from around 8000 BC. Take a moment to consider that astonishing timeline. For 5,000 years, humans ran their entire economy using nothing more than tiny pieces of clay. No symbols, no drawings, no writing, only physical objects that could be held in the hand. But this is where the story takes a dramatic turn and leads directly to the birth of writing. Around 3700 BC, administrators in Mesopotamia began sealing these counting tokens inside hollow clay balls. The original idea was simple and practical. You placed the tokens inside, sealed the ball, and rolled your cylinder seal across its surface to prove that no one had tampered with it. The tokens inside served as physical evidence of an economic transaction. How many sheep had been delivered to the temple, or how many jars of beer were still owed? It was a financial contract locked inside clay. But an immediate inconvenience appeared. You could not check the contents without breaking the ball open. And once you broke it open, the legal contract itself was destroyed. Then, someone came up with a brilliant idea. Before sealing the ball, they pressed each counting token into the soft clay on the outside. Now the impressions on the shell told you exactly what was inside. And then someone took the next great leap, a leap whose significance they probably did not realize at the time. If the impressions on the outside already contained all the necessary information, why bother putting the counting tokens inside at all? So they simply pressed the tokens directly into a flat piece of clay. The three-dimensional tokens immediately became two-dimensional symbols on a flat surface. A physical object had officially become a symbol. The representation of an object had emerged from this simple act. Writing was born not from artistic inspiration, but from a cost-cutting solution devised by accountants and administrators. In 1992, Schmont Besserat published this theory, sending shockwaves through the archaeological community. The earliest written symbols were not pictures depicting the natural world. They were drawings of counting tokens that had already represented that world for thousands of years. Writing did not begin by turning spoken language into images. It began by flattening three-dimensional calculations into two-dimensional forms. The earliest clay tablets from the city of Uruk, dating to around 3400 BC, provide evidence of this. More than 85% of the excavated clay tablets were administrative records, lists of grain distributions, livestock inventories, and production logs. The first written word in human history was almost certainly a number next to a drawing of a sack of barley. And the first recorded sentence probably said something along the lines of, "Received 33 sheep at warehouse number 4. However, while the people of Mesopotamia were pressing counting tokens into clay, 4,500 kilometers away, another remarkable development was taking place. In 1988, archaeologist Gunther Dreyer excavated an ancient tomb at Abydos, Egypt. He discovered nearly 200 small tags made of bone and ivory, each with holes punched through them. They had been attached to rolls of linen, jars of oil, and imported wine vessels. On these tags were numbers and pictorial symbols representing animals, plants, and place names. Tests showed that they dated to around 3320 BC. That date was comparable to, or even earlier than, the earliest clay tablets at Uruk. This discovery shattered the old assumption that writing had been invented only once in Mesopotamia and then spread to Egypt. Egyptian symbols were completely different from Mesopotamian cuneiform. They used local imagery such as flamingos, cobras, and lotus flowers. Two civilizations separated by deserts and seas had independently solved the same problem at roughly the same time. The need to store information was universal, only the solution was local. However, the earliest Mesopotamian writing symbols faced a major technical problem. Using a pointed stick to draw curves on wet clay was slow and often tore the surface. Around 2600 BC, scribes began doing something completely different. They cut their reed styluses so that the tips had a triangular shape. Instead of dragging the stylus across the clay, They simply pressed its tip firmly into the soft surface. The result was an extremely sharp and clean wedge-shaped impression. This was the birth of cuneiform. Then they made another strange transformation. They rotated the entire writing system 90 degrees counterclockwise. The reason for this change was extremely practical and technical. Scribes had shifted from holding clay tablets upright to laying them flat on a table. Writing from left to right across the flat surface allowed their right hand to avoid smearing the still wet clay marks. The entire appearance of one of the most important writing systems of the ancient world changed simply because of the habits of the human hand. By 2000 BC, the symbols had become completely abstract and began representing sounds rather than merely representing objects. Once writing could record sounds, it could immediately record any human thought. And that was when humanity encountered the first known author in history. Her name was Enheduanna, who lived around 2285 BC. She was the daughter of the great emperor Sargon and the high priestess of the moon god's temple at Ur. Enheduanna used cuneiform to compose great poems and hymns under her own name. Before her time, every written text in the world was anonymous. After her, the concept of individual authorship was born. The transition from "this text was recorded" to "I myself wrote this text" was a monumental turning point in human thought. Meanwhile, in the turquoise mining region of Sinai, another writing revolution was quietly taking place. In 1905, archaeologist Flinders Petrie discovered strange inscriptions carved into stone by miners. The Semitic-speaking miners borrowed the pictorial symbols of the Egyptians, but instead of using the Egyptian sounds, they assigned each picture the first sound of its name in their own language. The image of an ox's head, called Aleph in the Semitic language, became the symbol for the sound A. When you rotate the modern letter A upside down by 180 degrees, its two legs are the ox's horns, while the horizontal bar represents the bridge of its nose. Every time you write the letter A, you are looking at an ancient, upside-down ox. The image of a house, called Bet in the Semitic language, became the symbol for the sound B. They transformed hundreds of complicated symbols into a framework of just 22 simple letters. The alphabet was not created by kings or priests, but by ordinary miners. Anyone could memorize these 22 symbols in just a few weeks, instead of spending years training in scribal schools. The Phoenicians later carried this alphabet throughout the Mediterranean through trade. The Greeks adopted it, added vowels, and created the first complete alphabet. The threshold for literacy had fallen to its lowest level in human history. At the same time, on the other side of the world, China independently developed writing on turtle shells and animal bones around 1200 BC. In the Americas, the Olmec and Maya also created complex pictographic writing systems completely independently. At least 4 times in history, humans independently invented writing from scratch. The emergence of writing was an inevitable point of convergence when a civilization reached the limits of demographic and economic complexity. But there is a bitter truth that few people mention when discussing the history of writing. For thousands of years, writing did not liberate information for the masses. It was a powerful tool used by ruling elites to manage populations, monitor labor, and collect taxes. The literacy rate in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia was only around 1 to 2% of the population. Everything truly exploded in 1440 when Johannes Gutenberg developed the metal movable type printing press in Germany. The printing press transformed expensive books into something ordinary people could own. But as early as 370 BC, the philosopher Socrates had already issued a thought-provoking warning about writing. He feared that writing would damage human memory, making us lazy and leaving us with only the appearance of knowledge rather than genuine understanding. And the great historical irony is that we know about Socrates' warning only because his student Plato recorded it in writing. By 1443, King Sejong the Great of Korea had accomplished something unprecedented. He personally designed the Korean writing system, Hangul, based on the shapes of the tongue and the roof of the mouth during pronunciation, making it easier for ordinary people to learn to read. It is the only writing system in the world that was fully engineered by a single individual with the explicit purpose of eliminating illiteracy. Today, whenever you read a text message on your phone or a line of writing on a screen, you are operating a 5,000-year-old technological machine. More than 95% of international data traveling beneath the oceans through modern fiber optic cables is text. Writing is the tool that allows you to send your thoughts outside your brain so that someone living thousands of years later can still understand them. The letter A is an upside-down ox, the letter B is a house, and the letter M is a wave of water. Every day you are looking at ancient pictures. You have simply forgotten how to see them. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next journey into the mysteries of history.